Joining our conversation is Tony Breslin, author of the book Lessons from Lockdown. Good evening, Tony. Thank you for joining us. Tony, obviously the effects were not uniform, far from it. We all heard the stories of those who claimed or were deemed to have thrived during the lockdown for whatever reason. What would you say, having looked at the data in the way that you have, what would you say are the wider lessons that ought to be learned from this Ofsted report, perhaps?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I welcome, I mean, nobody wants to welcome the news in it, but one of the reasons why I welcome this report is that Ofsted is at last acknowledging, and the education system is acknowledging, teachers have known this from the beginning, but at the system level, that actually the profound impact here is not actually about where children are with fractions or even with literacy. That's really important, but it's about the role of schools in their social development. And what we have seen, I am more concerned about how a 6-year-old catches up on a year's missed play dates than on how she catches up on fractions. I am more worried about how a 14-year-old catches up in a year not jostling in the corridor in the way that drove me mad when I was teaching. Right? So I think we need. I welcome the fact that we're now putting the social stuff on the table. I think actually children have done much better educationally than has widely been suspected, and they are catching up broadly much quicker. But of course, we know the hardest impact always falls on the most disadvantaged. But just one thing I do want to say, and this is a real caution, I don't recognise this as being about a generation of children. This is about some of the children in this generation. And if we start talking about a generation of children, what we'll actually do is damage them by that label. So what we do need to acknowledge is that no two schools, no two children, no two families have had the same lockdown. And that actually what we really need to do now is to research that experience. Look, I don't think any of us can sit here and say it was the wrong thing, it was the right thing. I'm no defender of government, but, this was an entirely novel situation. We are where we are, and that's where we must move forward from. But what I would like to see is real longitudinal research that tracks, families, children, teachers over the next 5-10 years. I do think, and I have said in the book, that I initially thought there were 3 groups of people in this, right? Lockdown strugglers, lockdown survivors, and lockdown thrivers. I came to the conclusion that that was an error. It was an error because actually there weren't 3 groups of people. They were 3 sort of conditions that at different points we all have passed through over the last 2 years. There are points and aspects of this that have enabled some of us to thrive at certain things. There are periods where some of us have struggled. Some of us have struggled far more than others. That's why we mustn't talk about a generation, but get down to the detail. And most of us, most of the time, thankfully, have survived, and we have drawn on our resilience. You're absolutely right. We shouldn't go stress testing children about this. But you know what? Children are a product of their experience. There will be stuff that we can't kind of pay back, as it were, from this. But there may also be gains that this group of children have that actually might put some of them in very good stead. Let me give you one example, Neil. One of the things that upper primary school teachers often said in my research was that their year 5 and year 6 children were becoming better at being independent learners. However, teachers at the bottom of secondary and secondary school leaders said to me, children were more childish. You can have both of those at the same time. So the children missed out on the social. In the words of one head teacher who spoke to me, they kind of forgot how to play. I don't recognise what Laura says about schools. We've got 2 teenage boys in school. I don't recognise that, but I do recognise that, children have missed out on social development massively. And in all the aims to curriculum catch up, we may have missed that.
What concerns me is that we're moving on without any acknowledgement of damage done. You know, to the extent that the Prime Minister is still saying that the same tactic, the same idea that has been so roundly criticised in this report and the mistakes admitted to, he still won't, and no one around him will admit the mistake. I agree that the last thing you would want to do is stigmatise a group of people as though they're in some way, you know, disadvantaged for life. But the fact remains there surely ought to be a period of people in authority admitting they got it wrong. And as well as acknowledge, I'm all with you that we have to move forward. But surely it's also too early to move so swiftly on from an Ofsted report that acknowledges that babies, toddlers and the youngest children are struggling to crawl, walk, talk, read facial expressions and all of the rest of it. These are profound ways in which these children have been challenged, to say the least. And surely it's too early to just say, oh, well, and move on without somebody having to hold their hand up and say, that was me.
Yeah, look, I'm less interested in people holding their hands up because I'm not sure where it takes us, right? I do take the point about a bit more honesty from politicians across the range would really help. But I do think that what we have to acknowledge is that this is a challenge that will be different for every child and every family, and we have to get down to the bespoke difference. And one of the things that has contributed over the last 12 months, rather than the first 12 months, I feel, to some of the pressure children feel under, is on the one hand, people are telling them they're a lost generation. And on the other hand, they've been told to catch up and catch up and catch up. And actually, that's just not what they need at the moment. What they need is support to be the young people we want them to be and they want to be. And that means a much stronger focus on the social well-being of children, reintegrating children and so forth. But this group of children will of course they'll carry a very different childhood forward with them. But I don't doubt, just as previous challenged generations, I don't doubt they'll carry that trauma. I've done a lot of work myself in terms of trauma-related education and what have you. I don't doubt they'll carry that trauma, but I don't doubt also that they will carry strengths. And, you know, when we're seeing what the children in the Ukraine are going through, we really have to ask, was a bit more time than we would ever want, but a bit of time at home such a disaster? We start where we are, we work with the young children, the young people as they are. But actually, remember, if we say, let's get back to normal, the problem about let's get back to normal is the education system wasn't perfect beforehand. The children that are at the bottom now were at the bottom then. Now, they may be worse off and they may have a bigger challenge. But to kind of pretend that actually what they've missed out on is a perfectly functioning education system that works for every child is itself a fantasy. So let's look forward to the future. Let's rebuild for it, and let's not hark for a past that wasn't quite as golden as sometimes we'd all like it to be.
Tony Breslin, I like your optimism. I don't know if I share it. Tony Breslin, the author of Lessons from Lockdown. You're undoubtedly right that we have to build forward from here. I just don't like where we are here.